A Secret Worth Hiding, the unlikely romance between a homeless cleaner and a billionaire CEO. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Alcott Stories, where love, passion, and deep emotions come to life. Whether you're a returning viewer or new to this channel, I want you to know this is your home for breathtaking love stories that touch the heart. If this is your first time here, get ready for stories filled with romance, suspense, and emotions that will leave you speechless. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story that will capture your heart. And to my amazing returning viewers, thank you for being part of this journey. Your support, likes, comments, and shares mean the world to me. Every story I create is for you, and your love keeps this channel alive. If you love heart-touching love stories, like this video and drop a comment below. Tell me your thoughts, your favorite moments, or even suggest what kind of love story you'd love to see next. And of course, share this story with someone who loves romance as much as you do. Thank you for being here. Let's continue this journey of love together, because at Alcott Stories, love always finds a way. The city of New York shimmered under the glow of countless lights, a place where dreams were either made or shattered. At the top of a towering skyscraper sat Carter Enterprises, a billion-dollar tech empire built by the ruthlessly brilliant Alexander Carter. At just 30 years old, he was the face of power, success, and wealth. Every magazine labeled him the most eligible bachelor, a man whose sharp mind and chiseled jawline made him irresistible to women and unstoppable in business. Yet beneath the flawless suits and luxurious lifestyle, Alexander carried a secret burden: loneliness. The women he entertained were nothing more than temporary distractions. The champagne toasts at lavish parties tasted empty, and the endless business meetings failed to fill the void within him. He had everything money could buy, but something crucial was missing. He just didn't know what, until the night fate led him to Maya Thompson. Maya Thompson had lived a life of hardships. She had once dreamed of becoming a designer, creating art that spoke to the world, but life had been cruel. After losing her mother to illness and being abandoned by a father who never wanted her, she had been forced to navigate the brutal streets alone. With no family, no home, and no support, she took whatever jobs she could to survive another day. She had spent nights shivering under park benches, hiding from the dangers of the streets. Hunger gnawed at her, but it was the hopelessness that hurt more than anything. Society ignored women like her. The world moved on, too busy to notice the invisible souls struggling just to exist. When she finally found a cleaning job at Carter Enterprises, it felt like a blessing. It paid little, but it was enough for a cheap motel room and a meal. The night shifts were exhausting, but at least she had a roof over her head. She kept her head down, worked hard, and tried not to draw attention. But fate had other plans. It was a late evening when Maya rushed through the dimly lit office, carefully wiping down desks and mopping floors. Most of the employees had already left, leaving behind the quiet hum of computers and the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Tonight she was especially exhausted, her body aching from hours of work. Her worn-out sneakers made no sound as she moved through the grand office, her hands gripping a coffee cup she had made in the break room to stay awake. Her mind was lost in thoughts when she turned a corner and collided straight into a solid chest. The impact sent the coffee flying from her hands, splashing against the expensive white shirt of the man standing before her. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and for a split second, Maya froze in absolute horror. The man standing before her was none other than Alexander Carter. Her heart plummeted. She had seen him in magazines, on television, a man so wealthy and powerful that he might as well have been a king. His presence was overwhelming, tall, broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes that held an icy dominance. He exuded authority and control, his tailored suit clinging to his sculpted body in a way that made him look effortlessly elegant. Maya panicked. I am so sorry," she stammered, scrambling to grab napkins from her cleaning cart. Her hands shook as she reached for him, desperate to fix her mistake. Alexander didn't move. His body remained still, but his eyes were locked onto hers, deep, penetrating, unblinking. Maya expected rage, disgust, or worse, immediate termination. But to her utter shock, there was none of that. Captivated by her instead of yelling, Alexander found himself staring at her, completely captivated. The woman before him was stunning in a way he had never seen before. Not the polished, gold-digging women who threw themselves at him. Not the high society heiresses who were trained to say all the right things. She was real, raw, unpolished, yet breathtaking. Her skin was a rich, deep brown, glowing under the dim lights. Her dark, expressive eyes held a storm of emotions: fear, resilience, and a touch of defiance. Strands of wild, silky hair framed her delicate face, and despite wearing a simple uniform, she carried herself with an undeniable grace. Something stirred inside him, something unfamiliar. "Maya, isn't it?" His voice was smooth, deep, and dangerously low. She nodded, barely breathing. "Yes, sir. I—" Before she could finish, he reached for the napkins from her trembling hands, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. A strange electric charge passed between them, making Maya stiffen. "It's just coffee," he murmured, dabbing at his shirt. His gaze never left her. Maya couldn't understand. Why wasn't he angry? Why wasn't he yelling, demanding she be fired? Instead, he studied her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. She lowered her head, mumbling another apology, and turned to leave, when his voice stopped her. "Wait." She froze. Alexander took a step closer. Too close. The scent of his expensive cologne wrapped around her, intoxicating yet overwhelming. "Have we met before?" he asked, brows furrowing slightly. Maya's breath hitched. "No, sir," she whispered. "Strange," he murmured, eyes flickering with something unreadable. "You seem familiar." Maya swallowed, forcing herself to step back. "I should get back to work." Alexander didn't stop her this time, but as she hurried away, his piercing blue eyes followed her every movement. Something about her felt different, and for the first time in a long while, Alexander Carter was intrigued. The beginning of something dangerous. As Maya rushed down the hall, her heart pounded in her chest. She had made a mistake, a terrible one. She had allowed herself to linger too long in his presence, to feel the weight of his gaze and worse, to let herself be noticed. But it was already too late. Alexander Carter wasn't a man who forgot things easily. And that night, a powerful, dangerous spark had been ignited between them. Neither of them knew it yet, but their worlds were about to collide in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. Alexander Carter had always been surrounded by powerful men and breathtakingly beautiful women, the kind who dripped in designer labels, whispered seductive promises, and craved his wealth more than his presence. He had grown numb to their charm, accustomed to their rehearsed words and predictable affections. But Maya Thompson was different. She wasn't polished or calculating. She didn't bat her lashes at him or try to grab his attention. If anything, she actively avoided him, keeping her head down as she worked, never lingering too long in his presence. And that intrigued him. Since the night she had spilled coffee on his suit, he found himself noticing her more and more. It wasn't intentional at first, but every time he walked through his office at night, his gaze searched for her. He watched the way she moved swiftly, yet gracefully, the way she pressed her lips together in concentration as she scrubbed desks, the way her thick, dark hair cascaded over her shoulder when she thought no one was looking. Alexander told himself it was mere curiosity, but deep down he knew better. He was drawn to her. Maya's walls. Maya felt his eyes on her, even when he didn't speak. It made her skin prickle, her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to remain indifferent. She had seen men like him before, rich, entitled, and used to getting everything they wanted. She had spent too many nights in shelters and rundown motels listening to women tell horror stories of rich men who used and discarded them like old newspapers. She refused to be another name on that list. So she avoided his gaze, kept her distance, and reminded herself that men like Alexander Carter didn't fall for women like her. They only played with them. But fate had a way of shattering even the strongest defenses. The incident. It was late, past midnight, and the office was almost empty except for a few employees still working overtime. Maya moved through the halls quickly, her cleaning cart in front of her, eager to finish her shift. That's when she felt it. a presence behind her. Before she could turn, a hand grabbed her wrist. She gasped, her heart racing as she spun around to see Greg Winston, one of the senior financial executives, smirking down at her. He was in his 40s, married, and known for his wandering hands and inappropriate comments. "I've been watching you, Maya," Greg murmured, his fingers tightening around her wrist. Maya swallowed hard, yanking her arm away. "I have work to do," Greg chuckled, blocking her path. "Come on now, a girl like you, working so hard for pennies? I could take care of you, you know." His eyes roamed over her, making her stomach churn. "One night with me, and you wouldn't have to clean another damn desk again." Maya clenched her fists, her body stiff with rage and fear. She had dealt with men like him before, but before she could speak, a voice sliced through the tension like a blade. "Get your hands off her." The room fell into silence. Greg froze, his face draining of color, as he turned to see Alexander Carter standing a few feet away, his jaw tight with anger. Maya felt her breath hitch. Alexander's usual calm, controlled expression was gone. In its place was pure fury. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had always been unreadable, now burned with a dangerous intensity. Greg stammered, trying to save himself. "Mr. Carter, I was just what?" Alexander's voice was sharp, unforgiving, lethal. Greg swallowed hard. I was just having a little fun." Alexander took one menacing step forward, and Greg instantly backed away. "If I ever see you touch or speak to her again, you'll be out of a job so fast you won't even have time to beg." His voice was calm, but the danger in it was unmistakable. Greg mumbled a curse under his breath and scurried away. Maya exhaled shakily, her heart still hammering against her ribs. Then she felt it, Alexander's gaze on her. She slowly looked up, and when their eyes met, something shifted between them. The tension that couldn't be ignored. For a long, breathless moment, they simply stared at each other. Maya saw something raw in his expression, something she couldn't decipher. Was it anger, concern, or something deeper? Alexander's fists were still clenched at his sides, as if he were struggling to control himself. "Are you okay?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. Maya nodded, though her voice barely worked. Yes, I'm fine." A silence stretched between them, thick and heavy with unspoken words. She should have walked away. She should have thanked him and left. But she didn't, and neither did he. Instead, Alexander reached out, hesitating for only a second before brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maya's breath caught. His fingers were warm, lingering for just a moment too long. A shiver ran down her spine. Alexander felt it too, the invisible pull between them. He knew he should step back, that this was dangerous, that crossing a line with Maya could change everything. But in that moment, he didn't care, and neither did she. Their eyes remained locked, a silent battle raging between them. A battle neither of them was willing to admit they were losing. But deep down, they both knew. Something between them had already begun. The office was silent, except for the occasional hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of a city that never slept. It was past midnight, and the only source of light came from the dim hallway bulbs, casting eerie shadows against the walls. Maya Thompson moved quietly through the corridors, her heart heavy with the weight of exhaustion. Her body ached from hours of scrubbing floors and wiping down glass desks that would be dirty again the next morning. She didn't mind the hard work, but the crushing loneliness that came with it was suffocating. Tonight felt worse than usual. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that she had barely eaten. She had just $2 left in her pocket, barely enough to buy a cheap sandwich from a vending machine. But what was the point? Even if she ate, it wouldn't change the fact that she had nowhere to go after her shift. She had been sleeping in shelters, sometimes even on the subway, pretending to be a traveler waiting for a train. No one knew, no one cared, and that reality hit her harder than ever tonight. Tears in the darkness. She reached the small storage room where she usually took short breaks. It was the only place in the entire building where she felt invisible, where she could sit in silence, if only for a few moments. As soon as she closed the door behind her, the tears came. She pressed her hands to her face, her body trembling as silent sobs racked her frame. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. She had always been strong, always pushed forward. But tonight she felt like she was drowning. "Why does it have to be this hard?" she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. She curled into herself, pressing her forehead against her knees. She didn't hear the footsteps outside. She didn't hear the door creak open. It wasn't until she sensed someone standing nearby that she snapped her head up, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. And there he was, Alexander Carter, an unwanted witness. Maya's breath caught in her throat. Of all the people to witness her breakdown, why did it have to be him? Alexander stood in the doorway, his sharp blue eyes clouded with something unreadable. His usual cold, unreadable expression was gone, replaced by genuine concern. For a long, heavy moment, neither of them spoke. Then he stepped inside. Maya quickly wiped at her tears, attempting to regain composure. I'm fine," she blurted, her voice shaking. Alexander didn't move, his gaze unwavering. "You don't look fine." His tone was softer than usual, lacking its usual authority. It unnerved her. Maya straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to look him in the eye. "I don't need your pity, Mr. Carter." Something flickered in his eyes, a touch of frustration. "Pity?" he echoed. He took another step forward, his towering frame making the small storage room feel even smaller. "Is that what you think this is?" Maya didn't answer. Her pride wouldn't let her. A billionaire's unexpected kindness. Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure why, but seeing Maya cry affected him in a way he hadn't expected. She was always so strong, so guarded, but tonight she looked small, fragile, like a bird with broken wings. It stirred something deep inside him, something he didn't want to name. "I'm not here to offer pity," he said finally, "but if you need help—" "I don't need anything from you," Maya interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. Her words were sharp, but her eyes betrayed her. She was exhausted, hungry, hurting, and yet she still had the strength to refuse help. Alexander had met many people in his life, but none like her. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his black leather wallet. Maya's expression hardened immediately. "Don't," she warned, her voice shaking. But Alexander didn't take out money. Instead, he retrieved a small silk handkerchief. Maya blinked, confused. Gently, he crouched in front of her, his movements slow as if he were afraid she might run. And then, to her absolute shock, he lifted his hand and wiped away her tears. A moment that changed everything. Maya stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. The silk felt cool against her burning skin, but it wasn't the fabric that made her freeze. It was his touch. His fingers brushed against her cheek, light, careful, almost reverent. No man had ever touched her like this, not with such tenderness. Alexander felt it too. His fingers lingered, his pulse quickening as he realized just how close they were. Her eyes, those deep, expressive brown eyes, locked onto his. For a moment, the world outside didn't exist. There was only her breath against his skin, only the warmth of her beneath his touch. Something between them shifted. Maya swallowed hard, forcing herself to break the spell. She turned her face away, pulling back. "I should go." Alexander's fingers twitched, his body resisting the urge to stop her. But he knew better. If he pushed too hard, she'd run. So instead, he took a breath and nodded. "Okay." Maya stood up quickly, her hands trembling. But before she could leave, his voice stopped her. "Maya," she turned, her heart hammering. "If you ever need help," he said, his voice low, almost hesitant, "I'm here." Maya stared at him, trying to understand why a billionaire like him would care about a nobody like her. But she didn't have an answer. So without another word, she turned and walked away. Alexander watched her go, a strange ache settling in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, but deep down, he knew it was something. And it terrified him. Because Maya Thompson wasn't just a passing curiosity anymore. She was becoming something else entirely, something he wasn't ready to name, something he couldn't ignore. Alexander Carter sat in his corner office, staring at the city skyline. The dazzling lights of New York stretched endlessly, a world he had conquered effortlessly. Yet his mind was trapped elsewhere. Maya Thompson. Her name had become an unshakable presence in his thoughts. It wasn't just about that night when he had found her crying in the storage room. It wasn't just the way her soulful brown eyes had met his, filled with pain, yet refusing to break. It was everything about her, the way she moved quietly, how she worked tirelessly without complaint, and most of all, how she resisted him. Most women chased after him, desperate for his attention. But Maya, she avoided him, built walls around herself, and it was driving him insane. Why couldn't he stop thinking about her? Finding an excuse. He had never been a man to waste time on unnecessary distractions, but today he found himself wandering through the office halls, looking for something, anything, that would give him a reason to see her. Finally, he saw her. She was in the conference room, mopping the floor, her expression distant. Strands of her silky dark hair had fallen over her face, and she tucked them behind her ear absent-mindedly. Alexander should have walked away, but he didn't. Instead, he stepped inside. "Miss Thompson." Maya froze. She recognized that deep, commanding voice instantly. Slowly, she turned around, gripping the mop handle tightly as she faced the man who had haunted her thoughts far more than she'd admit. A storm outside, a battle within. As usual, his suit was impeccable, his presence effortlessly powerful. "Mr. Carter," she said cautiously. He took a step closer. "You didn't come to work last night." Maya's eyes widened slightly. "He noticed?" She hesitated, debating whether to tell him the truth. "There was a storm. I couldn't get here in time." He nodded as if he already knew. "And where did you sleep?" She stiffened. She couldn't tell him that she had spent the night in a subway station, cold and hungry, that she had clutched her bag tightly against her chest, terrified that someone might steal her last few belongings. "That's not important," she said instead. Alexander's jaw clenched. He hated that answer. He had always been a man of control, a man who solved problems before they even became problems. Yet here was Maya, suffering, struggling, and he was powerless to help her because she refused to let him. Finally, he made a decision. "I want you to stay at my penthouse." Maya's heart nearly stopped. "What?" "I have an extra room," he said casually, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "You don't have to sleep in unsafe places anymore." She shook her head instantly. "No." His gaze hardened. "Why not?" "Because," she struggled for the right words, "because I don't need your charity." His lips pressed into a thin line. "Then consider it a business arrangement," he said smoothly. Maya frowned. "A business arrangement?" "You stay in my penthouse until you find a permanent solution," he continued. "And in return, you can owe me a favor." She narrowed her eyes. "What kind of favor?" A small, knowing smile tugged at his lips. "I haven't decided yet." Maya's mind whirled with conflicting thoughts. Everything inside her screamed not to trust him. Rich men like him didn't help people like her without expecting something in return. But what choice did she have? Another night in the cold? Another night of hunger? Her pride was strong, but it wasn't strong enough to survive a storm. Accepting the offer. With great hesitation, she exhaled and said, "Fine." Alexander's expression didn't change, but with great hesitation, Maya exhaled and said, "Fine." Alexander's expression remained unreadable, but she could sense the slight satisfaction in his sharp blue eyes. She had no other option. Sleeping in the streets was not an option, and if accepting this temporary offer meant survival, then so be it. But deep inside, a voice whispered. This was dangerous, not because she feared Alexander's intentions, but because she feared her own heart. The drive to the penthouse. Later that evening, as Maya stood in front of Alexander's sleek black Bentley, she felt completely out of place. She hesitated before stepping in, feeling the contrast between her worn-out sneakers and the luxurious leather seats. As the car moved through the city, silence filled the space between them. Alexander glanced at her several times, noticing how she kept her arms folded, her body stiff. "You look like I'm taking you to a prison," he finally said. Maya turned to him. I don't belong in your world, Mr. Carter. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel. We'll see about that. Stepping into luxury. When they arrived at his penthouse, Maya stared in awe. The building was one of the tallest in Manhattan, and the moment they stepped into the elevator, she felt dizzy from the thought of living in a place like this. Alexander's penthouse was nothing short of breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and the marble floors gleamed under the chandelier lights. Maya had never seen so much luxury in her entire life, but rather than admiring it, she felt uneasy. Alexander walked ahead and opened a door. This will be your room. Maya peeked inside. It was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. This is too much, she said. He leaned against the doorway. It's just a room. For you, she muttered. For him, this was nothing. But for her, this was a world she never imagined stepping into. A late-night conversation. That night, Maya found herself unable to sleep. Even though the bed was soft and warm, her mind was racing. She had spent years struggling, surviving. Now suddenly she was in a billionaire's penthouse. It felt unreal. A knock on the door startled her. Maya! She opened the door and found Alexander standing there, his shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. He gestured toward the balcony. Come with me. A moment of honesty. Maya followed him outside, where the city lights sparkled like a sea of stars. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the night breeze. Alexander stood beside her, silent for a moment. Then he said something that surprised her. I don't sleep well either. She looked at him, a billionaire with everything he could want, and yet he couldn't sleep. Why? She asked. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. There are things money can't fix, Maya. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes, loneliness. And for the first time, she realized that Alexander Carter wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man with his own demons, a dangerous connection. The more time Maya spent with him, the more she saw the man behind the wealth. And the more Alexander watched her, the more he realized she was different, not just from the women in his world, but from anyone he had ever met. And that scared him, because for the first time in his life, Alexander Carter wanted something money couldn't buy. He wanted her. Living under the same roof had created a storm neither of them saw coming. Alexander Carter had always been a man of control. His world followed his rules. But Maya Thompson was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was strong, stubborn, and fiercely independent. And that was exactly why she was so dangerous to him. Maya, on the other hand, had promised herself that she wouldn't get too comfortable in his world. She was here temporarily, nothing more. But as the days passed, she found it harder and harder to ignore the man behind the billionaire mask. Alexander wasn't just a powerful CEO. He was someone who carried deep loneliness, someone who hid his emotions behind his wealth. And that realization shook her, because she had started seeing him as more than just her employer. The tension between them. Every day, the undeniable tension between them grew stronger. It was in the way Alexander's gaze lingered on her whenever she walked past him. It was in the moments when their hands accidentally brushed against each other, sending an electric current between them. It was in the late nights when Maya would find Alexander sitting alone in his penthouse, staring at the city lights, his thoughts lost somewhere she couldn't reach. It was dangerous. It was something neither of them could afford, and yet neither of them could stop it. An unexpected argument. One evening, the tension finally snapped. Maya had spent the whole day avoiding Alexander, trying to remind herself that this was temporary, but Alexander had noticed. He stormed into the living room, where Maya was curled up on the couch reading. Maya! His voice was firm, demanding. She sighed, placing her book down. What is it, Alexander? His blue eyes burned into hers. Why are you avoiding me? Her heart pounded. I'm not. His jaw clenched. Yes, you are. And I want to know why. She stood up, folding her arms. Because this, she gestured between them, is dangerous. We are from two different worlds. I don't belong here. Something dark flickered in his eyes. Who told you that? I don't need anyone to tell me, she snapped. I know it. You are a billionaire. I am a cleaner. That's the truth, Alexander. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. Do you think that matters to me? Yes, she whispered. Maybe not now, but it will. His fist clenched, frustration pouring off him. You think you know everything about me, don't you? But you don't, Maya. You see what I let the world see. But there's more. She swallowed hard. Then show me. The moment that changed everything. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then in a heartbeat, everything changed. Alexander reached for her, his hands gripping her arms, his touch sending a fire through her skin. Their eyes locked, and in that moment, all the unsaid words, all the suppressed emotions exploded. His lips crashed against hers. Maya gasped, but instead of pushing him away, she found herself melting into him. The kiss was nothing like she had ever imagined. Raw, desperate, filled with all the tension they had both been fighting for days. Alexander's arms tightened around her waist, pulling her closer, as if he was afraid to let go, as if she was the only real thing in his world. And for the first time, Maya allowed herself to forget everything. For this one moment, she let herself fall, because deep inside she knew there was no turning back now. Maya had never allowed herself to dream of love, not real love. Love was a luxury she had never been able to afford. It had always been something distant, unreachable, a fantasy meant for others but never for her. Yet in Alexander's arms, she had felt something dangerously close to it. After their unexpected passionate kiss, she had spent the entire night awake, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. She had felt his warmth, his strength, his desperation. She had felt the way he had held her, as if she was something precious, as if she mattered. For the first time in years, she had allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could have something more. But deep down, she knew better, because her past was not something she could run from. And soon enough, it came knocking. The shadow from her past. It was late evening when it happened. Maya had just finished cleaning up in the penthouse kitchen when she heard a knock at the door. Frowning, she wiped her hands on a towel and went to open it, and her heart stopped. Standing there, like a ghost from her nightmares, was Damien Carter, the man she had prayed never to see again. Her blood turned ice cold. "Hello, Maya." Damien's voice was smooth, almost amused. "Miss me?" She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It had been 3 years since she had last seen him, 3 years since she had run. But here he was, finding her. Her hands shook as she gripped the edge of the door. "What do you want, Damien?" He leaned against the doorway, his dark eyes glittering with something dangerous. "Oh, come on. Is that any way to greet an old friend?" "I am not your friend," Damien chuckled, stepping closer. "No, I suppose you're not. You were always more than that, weren't you?" Maya's stomach churned. "I don't know how you found me, but I want nothing to do with you." Damien's smile vanished. "That's the thing, Maya. You don't get to decide that. You think you can escape who you are? You think you can erase the past?" He leaned in, his voice dropping. "You can't, and you never will." Fear clawed at her throat. She had built a new life, one where no one knew her secrets. But Damien had the power to destroy everything. "I'm not that girl anymore," she whispered. "But I still remember her." He smirked. "And I don't think your new billionaire boyfriend would be too happy if he found out the truth, do you?" Her chest tightened. "Leave, Damien. Whatever you think you have over me, it's over." Damien's face darkened. "You and I both know it's not." Then with one final knowing glance, he turned and disappeared into the night. A heartbreaking decision. Maya shut the door and pressed her back against it, her entire body trembling. She had fought so hard to build something new, to find peace. But now that peace was shattered. Damien wasn't just a threat to her, he was a threat to Alexander. And she couldn't let that happen. Her mind raced with one desperate thought. She had to leave. Alexander had given her safety, warmth, and a place to breathe. But if she stayed, she would only bring danger into his life. She couldn't let him suffer because of her past. Her heart ached, but she knew what she had to do. The pain of walking away. That night, while Alexander was still at work, Maya packed her small bag. She moved quickly, her hands shaking as she stuffed her few belongings inside. Every piece of clothing, every belonging reminded her of him. She swallowed the pain. She had no choice. With one last glance at the penthouse, she turned and walked out the door, leaving behind the only place that had ever felt like home. Alexander's heartbreak. When Alexander returned home that night, he immediately felt something was wrong. The penthouse was too quiet. His brows furrowed as he walked through the living room, calling her name. Maya? No answer. A cold feeling settled in his chest. He checked the kitchen. Empty. He walked into her room. Her closet was open, and her belongings were gone. Something inside him shattered. She was gone. His heart pounded. He reached for his phone and dialed her number. It rang and rang, but she never answered. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter felt truly lost. Maya had disappeared without a word, and the worst part was, he had no idea why. The beginning of his search. Alexander spent the rest of the night trying to understand what had happened. Had she been unhappy? Had she regretted the moment they shared? Had he done something to push her away? His mind spiraled with questions, but he had no answers. All he knew was that the woman he had let into his heart, the woman he had started to fall for, was gone, and something inside him refused to accept it, no matter what it took. He was going to find her. Alexander Carter sat in his dimly lit living room, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. The city lights twinkled through the vast glass windows, but for the first time in years, New York felt empty to him. His mind was plagued with the same question, one that refused to let him rest. Why did she leave? It had been 3 weeks since Maya disappeared, and every passing day felt like a knife twisting deeper into his heart. He had searched for a note, a message, any clue as to why she vanished so suddenly, but there was nothing. She had packed her few belongings and left without a trace, without an explanation, without even a goodbye. And the worst part, he couldn't let her go. A love that refused to fade. At first, Alexander tried to bury himself in work, thinking that time would erase the ache in his chest. But no matter how many meetings he attended, how many deals he closed, or how many people surrounded him at high-end events, his mind always drifted back to her, to the way she would smile softly when she thought no one was watching, to the sound of her laughter, so rare yet so beautiful, to the warmth of her body when she had leaned against him that night. And most of all, to the way she had kissed him. It wasn't just lust. It wasn't just a passing attraction. Maya Thompson had changed him. She had stepped into his world, completely unafraid, and for the first time in his life, someone had seen the real him. And he couldn't lose her. He wouldn't. The search begins. Alexander was a man of power. If Maya thought she could disappear, she was wrong. He pulled every string he had, private investigators, security footage, tracking her phone records, anything that could lead him to her. Days passed, then weeks. Yet every search came up empty. No new job under her name. No registered address. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Frustration burned in his chest. He slammed his fists onto his desk, sending papers flying. "Where the hell are you, Maya?" he growled under his breath. Then just when he was about to lose hope, he found a lead. Maya's hidden struggle. Maya sat on the edge of a cheap motel bed, staring at the flickering ceiling light. The air smelled of old cigarettes and mildew, but it was the only place she could afford. She clutched the thin blanket around her, shivering, not just from the cold, but from the war raging inside her. She had done the right thing, hadn't she? Leaving Alexander was the only way to protect him from her past. If Damien had found her, he could find Alexander too. And she refused to drag him into the darkness she had tried so hard to escape. But deep down, the truth clawed at her. She missed him. She missed his voice, the way he looked at her like she was something more than just a struggling cleaner. She missed feeling safe. But love wasn't meant for her. She had made her choice, and she had to live with it. Alexander's determination. It was a late night when Alexander's investigator finally called. "We found something," the man said. Alexander's pulse quickened. "Where?" "She checked into a rundown motel 2 weeks ago. Room 304. He didn't wait for another word. Within minutes, Alexander was in his car, speeding through the city. He was going to bring her back. The motel confrontation. Maya jolted awake at the sound of loud knocking on her motel door. Her heart pounded. For a second, fear gripped her. Had Damien found her again? But then, a familiar, deep voice came from the other side. Maya, open the door! Her breath caught. Alexander. She hesitated, gripping the blanket tightly. But the knocking came again, more urgent this time. I know you're in there. Open the damn door. Tears burned in her eyes. She had wanted to see him again, so badly. But if she did, would she be able to walk away again? Her hands trembled as she slowly turned the doorknob. And when she finally opened it, Alexander stood there, his stormy blue eyes filled with emotions she had never seen before. A battle of feelings. The moment their eyes met, Alexander stepped forward, gripping her shoulders. Why? His voice was raw, filled with frustration and pain. Why did you leave me? Maya swallowed hard, looking away. I had to. That's not an answer. She trembled, her walls crumbling. You wouldn't understand. Then make me understand, he demanded. She took a deep breath, her lips quivering. Because I don't belong in your world, Alexander. And if you knew the truth about me, you wouldn't want me in it. His jaw tightened. You don't get to decide that for me. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You deserve someone better. I don't want better, he whispered fiercely. I want you. The words shattered her. She shook her head, stepping back. You don't mean that. Alexander's eyes flashed with determination. Try me. Then, before she could push him away, he cupped her face and kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, a kiss of anger, longing, and love all mixed together. Maya melted against him, her body betraying her heart. For a moment, she let herself believe in the impossible. But when he pulled away, looking at her like she was his entire world, she knew she couldn't run anymore. Not from him, not from this love. But could she really risk letting him in? Or would her past come back to destroy everything? Alexander Carter had searched everywhere for Maya, from hotels to shelters, even hiring investigators. He had turned the city upside down. Yet weeks later, fate did what money couldn't. One evening, exhausted from another fruitless search, he decided to stop at a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. He barely glanced up as he walked in, lost in thought. But then, his world stopped. Behind the counter, wearing a simple black apron and taking orders with a quiet, tired smile, was Maya. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. His heart pounded in his chest, his hands curling into fists. She was right there, so close, yet so far away. She hadn't vanished. She hadn't disappeared into some unknown world. She was here, hiding from him, face to face. Again, Maya felt his intense gaze before she even turned around. Her entire body froze when she saw him standing in the doorway. Tall, powerful, and furious. His blue eyes burned into hers, filled with anger, heartbreak, and something else. Something dangerous. She almost dropped the tray in her hands. Alexander, she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. The moment she spoke his name, he moved. Long, determined strides brought him straight to the counter. Before she could react, he grabbed her wrist, his grip firm, but not painful. We need to talk. Now. His voice was low, filled with restrained fury. Maya's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, but not this time. She had to face him. She turned to her manager, who was watching curiously. I need a break. The woman nodded, and before Maya could say anything else, Alexander dragged her outside. The confrontation. The second they were alone in the alley behind the cafe, Alexander exploded. Why did you leave me? His voice was sharp, filled with frustration. Maya flinched but held her ground. I had to. That's not a damn answer. His jaw clenched. You left without a word, without an explanation. Do you have any idea what you put me through? Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I did it for you. Alexander let out a bitter laugh. For me? His eyes darkened. That's the worst excuse I've ever heard. Maya shook her head, looking away. He grabbed her chin gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. No more running, Maya. Tell me the truth. Her body trembled. She had spent so long hiding it, so long bearing the past. But now, standing in front of the only man who had ever made her feel safe, she realized he deserved the truth. even if it meant losing him forever. The dark truth. Maya took a deep breath, her hands clutching her apron tightly. I was framed, she whispered. Alexander's eyes narrowed. Framed? For what? Her heart ached as she spoke the words she had kept buried for years. A crime I didn't commit. The weight of her past came crashing down. I used to have a normal life, Alexander. A home, a job, friends. But one mistake, one terrible twist of fate, took everything from me. Alexander listened, his face unreadable. Maya swallowed hard, her hands trembling. I worked as an assistant in a law firm. One night, I stayed late to finish some reports. But when I walked into the senior partner's office, I found him lying on the floor, unconscious, his safe open, money missing. Tears welled in her eyes as the painful memory resurfaced. I called the police. I thought I was doing the right thing. But when they arrived, the evidence pointed to me. The surveillance footage was erased. My fingerprints were everywhere. And the worst part? Her voice broke. Alexander didn't move. His eyes locked onto her. The real thief? He was the son of the firm's owner. And no one wanted to believe a poor assistant over a wealthy heir. Maya clenched her fists. They pinned it on me. I was arrested, humiliated, and fired. My savings went into legal fees. My friends turned their backs. And when I was finally released, I had nothing. She took a deep, shaky breath. I became homeless. I had no job, no money, no family to turn to. That's why I took the cleaning job at your company. It was the only place that would hire someone like me. Silence hung between them. Maya stared at the ground, afraid to see the disgust in Alexander's eyes, afraid of losing him. But when she finally looked up, he wasn't disgusted. He wasn't angry. He was furious. Not at her, but at the world that had betrayed her. Alexander's realization, Maya, his voice was rough, filled with emotion. She bit her lip. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to ruin your reputation. I didn't want people whispering about how the great Alexander Carter was involved with someone like me. Alexander stepped forward, gripping her shoulders. Damn my reputation. Maya gasped as he pulled her against him. I don't care about your past, he said fiercely. I care about you. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. But no buts. His hands tightened. You are not your past, and you sure as hell aren't alone anymore. Maya sobbed, overwhelmed. She had expected anger, disappointment, but instead, he held her like she was his entire world. The promise Alexander pulled back slightly, cupping her face. I swear to you, Maya, I will fix this. She blinked in shock. What? He smirked, his expression deadly serious. You think I became a billionaire without knowing how to destroy corrupt men? Maya gasped. You can't. Oh, I can. His blue eyes burned with determination. That man ruined your life. Now I'm going to ruin his. Maya's breath hitched. For the first time in years, hope flickered in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. Maya sat on the small bench outside the cafe, her arms wrapped around herself as if shielding her heart from the storm raging inside her. Alexander stood before her, his tall, commanding presence filling the narrow alleyway. His face was serious, his blue eyes searching hers. Maya, he said softly, look at me. She hesitated, staring down at her hands. She didn't want to see the truth in his eyes, the truth that she was afraid to believe, because if she believed it, and it wasn't real, it would break her. But Alexander wasn't a man who allowed avoidance. He reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I need you to hear me, he murmured. Her breath hitched at his touch, but she forced herself to remain still. Alexander exhaled sharply, stepping back and running a hand through his hair. Do you really not see it? His voice was raw with frustration. See what? She whispered. How much I care about you, he said, his voice firm. How much you mean to me. Maya's heart pounded violently in her chest. No, this wasn't possible. He was Alexander Carter, a billionaire, a man who could have any woman in the world. And she was Maya Thompson, a homeless cleaner with a broken past. It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. She shook her head. Alexander, you don't know what you're saying. His jaw clenched. I know exactly what I'm saying. She turned away. I'm just a cleaner. A woman with nothing to offer you. A woman who, don't say that. His voice was sharp, almost desperate. Maya flinched but remained silent. Alexander took a deep breath, stepping closer. I don't care about any of that. I don't care where you came from, what your past looks like, or what anyone thinks. You're not just a cleaner to me. His voice softened. You are the only woman who has ever mattered. Maya's breath caught. Her entire body went still. Did she hear him right? The fear of believing. Maya's mind screamed at her not to believe him. Men like Alexander didn't love women like her. They didn't fight for women like her. They didn't confess their feelings in dark alleyways, looking as if their entire world depended on her answer. Alexander, she said, shaking her head, you don't love me. You feel sorry for me. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. Is that what you think? He asked, stepping even closer. She swallowed hard, her back pressed against the cold brick wall. I think you're a kind man, she said carefully, and maybe you feel a connection to me because of my struggles. But love? She let out a hollow laugh. That's not what this is. His gaze darkened. I know the difference between pity and love, Maya. Her heart thudded violently. I've had women throw themselves at me for my money, for my power, he continued, his voice low. I've had relationships that were built on nothing but illusions, and yet none of them, not one of them, ever made me feel the way you do. Maya closed her eyes, willing herself not to fall into the trap of hope. She couldn't. Hope was dangerous. The breaking point. Alexander saw the battle raging inside her. He saw the way she clenched her fists, the way her lips trembled with unspoken words, and it hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't rejecting him because she didn't feel the same way. She was rejecting him because she was terrified, terrified of believing, terrified of trusting, and that realization broke him. Tell me the truth, Maya. His voice dropped to a whisper. Do you feel anything for me? She stiffened. He stepped closer, his warmth seeping into her frozen skin. Do you feel nothing when I touch you? His fingers brushed against hers, sending a wave of electricity up her arm. Her breathing grew shallow. Do you feel nothing when I look at you like this? His gaze was scorching, his lips just inches from hers. Maya squeezed her eyes shut. Her body betrayed her. Her heart betrayed her. She felt everything. She had always felt everything. But she couldn't say it. She couldn't let herself say it. Because if she admitted it, if she gave in to this beautiful lie, she wouldn't survive when it shattered. So she did the only thing she could. She lied. I don't feel anything. Alexander's breath hitched. For a moment there was nothing but silence. Then he laughed. A cold, bitter laugh that sent a chill down Maya's spine. The last attempt. Alexander shook his head, stepping back. You're a terrible liar, Maya. She bit her lip, but he wasn't done. You think I don't see it? His voice was quieter now, almost sad. The way your pulse races when I'm near, the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. Maya remained silent, her throat burning. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. I've never begged for anything in my life, he admitted. Maya's breath hitched. But if I have to beg for you, I will. Tears slipped down her cheeks. He stepped forward, his fingers gently wiping them away. I love you, Maya. His voice was raw, unshakable. And I'll spend every damn day proving it to you. Maya's chest ached. How was she supposed to fight this? How was she supposed to push away a man who was willing to fight for her? She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, Alexander did something that shattered her world completely. He kissed her. A kiss that changed everything. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a declaration, a battle against every fear, every doubt, every wall she had built. Maya gasped as his lips moved against hers, slow, deep, and desperate. She should have resisted. She should have pulled away. But instead, she melted. She let herself feel. And in that moment, she realized she was falling, and there was no turning back. For the first time in years, Maya felt warmth inside her chest, a warmth that told her it was okay to believe, okay to trust. After that life-altering kiss, She had let herself surrender to the truth she had fought so hard to deny. She loved Alexander Carter, and despite everything, their different worlds, her painful past, and her lingering fears, she had decided to stay. Alexander had promised her that he would fight for her, that he would love her without conditions, without judgment. And for once, she allowed herself to believe in something more than just survival. But happiness, she knew, was a fragile thing. And sometimes when the light becomes too bright, the shadows grow darker. She just didn't know that her past was about to come knocking at her door, ready to shatter everything. Maya was at Alexander's penthouse that evening, curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea. The city lights outside the window shimmered like scattered diamonds, but her focus was on the man standing in the kitchen. Alexander had insisted on making dinner tonight. Seeing a billionaire CEO struggle to chop vegetables was a sight she never thought she'd witness, but it warmed her heart. "Are you sure you don't need help?" she teased, watching as he narrowed his eyes at the cutting board. "I'm a grown man, Maya," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "I can handle a simple meal." She chuckled, shaking her head. "If you say so, Mr. Billionaire." A comfortable silence settled between them. Maya let herself relax, let herself feel something close to peace. And then, her phone vibrated. The sound sent an eerie chill down her spine. She frowned. She barely received calls. Only Alexander and her old coworker from the cafe had her number. Hesitant, she picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. Her stomach dropped. The name flashing across the screen was one she had prayed she would never see again. Liam Holloway. Her hands trembled as she stood up, heart hammering against her ribs. She felt suffocated, as if the walls of the penthouse had suddenly closed in around her. The past had found her. Again. She walked toward the balcony, stepping outside so Alexander wouldn't hear. With shaking fingers, she answered the call. A cold, familiar voice greeted her. "Hello, Maya." Her throat went dry. "Liam," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I was wondering when you'd answer," he said smoothly. "You've been avoiding me." Her fingers clenched around the phone. "I don't want anything to do with you." A chuckle, dark, mocking. "Oh, sweetheart, you don't get to decide that." Maya's breath hitched. She gritted her teeth. "What do you want?" Silence. Then in a voice laced with quiet malice, Liam said, "I want you to leave Alexander Carter. Immediately." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm not running anymore," she said, voice stronger than she felt. "You have no control over me." Liam tisked. "Oh, Maya, you always were naive." She shivered. "I have enough proof to destroy you," he continued. "The lies, the accusations. If I leak the right information, I can make the world believe you're a criminal." Maya's breath caught. "I'll make sure Alexander's company suffers for being associated with you. I'll turn the media against him. The investors will tear him apart. Do you really think they'd stand by his side for a woman like you?" A lump formed in her throat. Liam knew exactly where to strike. If it were just her, she would fight back. But Alexander had already fought so many battles in the corporate world. His name was his power, and if it was dragged into a scandal, his entire empire could crumble. She couldn't do that to him. Liam's voice dipped into something even more sinister. "Leave him, Maya, or I will ruin him." A shiver crawled down her spine. "And don't even think about telling him," Liam warned, "because if you do," he chuckled darkly, "let's just say accidents happen." Maya's blood ran cold. He wasn't just threatening Alexander's reputation. He was threatening his life. Maya stood frozen on the balcony long after the call ended, her mind racing. She couldn't let this happen. She wouldn't let Liam destroy the only man who had ever made her feel safe, the only man who had ever seen her for more than just a shattered past. There was only one way to protect Alexander. She had to leave. She had to break his heart before Liam could break him completely. The thought nearly crushed her, but there was no choice. With tears in her eyes, she turned back toward the penthouse, her gaze locking onto Alexander as he stood in the kitchen, completely unaware of the storm raging inside her. Her chest ached. How was she supposed to walk away from him? How was she supposed to pretend that the love in his eyes meant nothing to her? Her fists clenched. She had to do this. She had to protect him, even if it meant destroying herself in the process. When she stepped back inside, Alexander looked up, a warm smile on his face. "You were gone for a while," he said. "Everything okay?" Maya forced a smile. "A lie." "Yeah," she whispered. "Another lie." Alexander narrowed his eyes, studying her. "Maya?" Her throat burned. She couldn't do this now, not while he was looking at her with such tenderness. She needed time to prepare herself. I I need some fresh air," she mumbled, backing away. Alexander frowned. "You just came from outside." I just, she swallowed hard. "I just need to clear my head." Alexander watched her for a long moment, concern etched across his face. But finally he nodded. "Okay," he said gently. "Take your time." Maya bit her lip to keep it from trembling. She turned, walking toward the bedroom, toward the place she would pack her things and disappear before dawn. And as she walked away, her silent tears fell, because she knew. By this time tomorrow, she would be gone, and Alexander Carter would hate her forever. Maya stood in front of the bed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at the empty suitcase. She hadn't packed a single thing yet. Her fingers trembled as she reached for her clothes, stuffing them into the bag with shaky hands. Every item she folded felt like a piece of her heart being torn away. This is the only way. Liam had left her no choice. If she stayed, Alexander would lose everything. His reputation, his empire, his life could be at risk. A choked sob slipped from her lips. She loved him, but love wasn't always enough. She grabbed a sheet of paper from the bedside table, blinking back tears as she picked up a pen. If she couldn't say goodbye in person, she would leave him something. A final letter. With a deep, shuddering breath, she began to write. Alexander, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I know this will hurt you, and I wish I had the strength to stay. But the truth is, I don't belong in your world. I never did. I was foolish to think we could ever work. You deserve someone who fits into your life, someone who doesn't carry the kind of past that I do. You once told me that you don't care about my past. But Alexander, my past cares about me. It follows me, haunts me, and it will never let me go. And I can't let it touch you. Please don't come looking for me. Please move on. You deserve happiness, real happiness, not a woman with a history of pain and shadows. Forget me, Alexander. Maya. The ink blurred as her tears splattered onto the paper. This would destroy him, but she had to make him hate her. She had to make him believe that she didn't love him enough to stay. Because if he knew the truth, if he knew she was protecting him, he would never stop fighting for her. And if he fought for her, Liam would ruin him. Maya folded the letter with trembling fingers and placed it on his pillow, the last place she had felt safe. Then, without another word, she turned, picked up her bag, and walked out of Alexander Carter's life. Forever. When Alexander woke up the next morning, he immediately reached out for Maya, only to feel the cold emptiness of the sheets beside him. A frown crossed his face. Maya? No response. Something felt wrong. He sat up, his chest tightening with unease. His eyes flickered toward the pillow, and then he saw it. A single envelope. His heartbeat thundered as he picked it up, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded the letter. And as his eyes scanned over Maya's words, a heavy, suffocating pain crashed into his chest. His hands tightened around the paper. Number. This couldn't be real. His jaw clenched. Maya wouldn't just leave him like this. She wouldn't walk away without saying goodbye. Would she? Alexander crumpled the letter in his fists. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. This wasn't a simple goodbye. This was a lie. Alexander refused to believe that Maya had left willingly. She had been happy last night. He had seen it in her eyes, felt it in the way she had looked at him. Something changed, and he was going to find out what. He grabbed his phone, his voice sharp as he called his personal investigator. I need you to find Maya, he ordered. She left my penthouse last night. His investigator hesitated. Sir, are you sure she didn't leave by choice? Alexander's jaw clenched. I don't believe she did, he said darkly. There was a pause. I'll start digging, the investigator finally responded. I'll track her location first. Alexander hung up, pacing the room. His mind raced with possibilities. Had someone threatened her? Was she in danger? A wave of fury crashed through him. If someone had forced her to leave, if someone had hurt her, he would destroy them. 2 days passed and Alexander received a call from his investigator. "We found her," the man said. Alexander's breath caught. "Where?" "She's staying at a small motel on the outskirts of the city," the investigator replied. "Alone." Alexander exhaled, relief mixed with frustration. She was safe. But why was she hiding? And then, "Sir," the investigator continued, "I also looked into her past, and I think you need to see what I found." Alexander frowned. "What do you mean?" There was a long pause before the investigator responded. "Maya was framed for a crime she didn't commit." Alexander froze. "What?" "The accusations against her, the ones that forced her into homelessness, they were all lies. Someone set her up, made it impossible for her to clear her name." Alexander's entire body tensed. His fingers tightened around his phone. Who? Who had done this to her? And why? And then, as if reading his mind, the investigator spoke the name that made Alexander's blood turn ice cold. Liam Holloway. A dangerous silence filled the air. Alexander's fingers clenched into fists. He knew that name. Liam Holloway was a ruthless businessman, a man with too many enemies, a man known for bending the law to his will. And now he knew that Liam had destroyed Maya's life. Rage burned through Alexander like wildfire. If Liam had threatened her again, if he had forced her to leave, then he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Alexander wasn't going to let Maya suffer alone. He was going to find her. He was going to expose the truth. And if Liam Holloway thought he could take Maya away from him, then he had no idea who he was dealing with, because Alexander Carter was about to bring hell to his doorstep. And he wouldn't stop until Maya was back where she belonged, in his arms. Alexander Carter was not a man to be crossed, and yet Liam Holloway had made the biggest mistake of his life. The moment Alexander learned the truth about Maya's past, a deadly rage burned inside him. Maya had been framed. She had suffered, lost everything, and run from him, all because of one man, Liam. Alexander's fingers curled into fists as he sat in his office, staring at the detailed report his investigator had sent. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a crime, and Liam Holloway was going to pay for it, personally. Alexander grabbed his phone, dialing a number with a cold, controlled fury. "Find him," he ordered, "and make sure he knows. I'm coming for him." Liam Holloway was a man used to control, used to winning. But when Alexander stormed into his luxury office, surrounded by his top security team, Liam realized he had underestimated the wrong man. Alexander's ice-blue eyes burned with restrained fury as he slammed a folder onto Liam's desk. "Tell me, Liam," Alexander said smoothly, his voice deceptively calm. "Do you enjoy ruining people's lives?" Liam smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You should be careful, Carter. You're stepping into something bigger than you." Alexander didn't smile. Instead, he reached into the folder, pulling out a series of legal documents, evidence that exposed Liam's corruption, bank records, bribery transactions, proof of fabricated charges against Maya. Liam's smirk faltered. Alexander leaned in, his voice now a low, dangerous whisper. "You destroyed an innocent woman's life," he said. "You took everything from her, but now, Liam, I'm taking everything from you." Liam's eyes darkened. "You think you can—" "I don't think," Alexander cut in, his tone lethal. "I know." He stepped back, straightening his suit. "By tomorrow morning, your company will be under investigation," he continued. "Your bank accounts, frozen, your business partners, gone, and your influence?" He smirked darkly. "Let's just say you won't have any left." Liam paled. Alexander turned, heading for the door. "Oh," he added, pausing, "and if you ever come near Maya again—" He glanced over his shoulder, his voice turning deadly. "You won't just lose your company." Liam swallowed hard, the weight of the threat sinking in. And then, Alexander walked out, leaving behind a ruined man. Within 24 hours, the news broke. Liam Holloway, exposed. The media exploded with reports of his crimes. Authorities launched a full-scale investigation, And most importantly, Maya's name was finally cleared. Alexander watched the headlines from his penthouse, but his chest was still tight. Because even though she was free, she was gone. Alexander wasted no time. He called his investigator. "Where is she?" The response was instant. "Sir, Maya left the city before you confronted Liam. She's off the grid." Alexander's stomach clenched. Maya ran. She had no idea what he had done for her. No idea that she no longer had to hide. No idea that he was fighting for her, and Alexander wasn't going to let her go again. "Find her," he commanded. "I don't care what it takes. Find Maya." Days turned into weeks. Alexander searched everywhere. Every motel, every small town, every possible place Maya could have gone. But she had vanished. His chest tightened every night as he lay in bed, reaching for someone who wasn't there. His penthouse was empty without her. His life was empty without her. And he would tear the entire world apart to find her again. Then, one evening, as Alexander was reviewing another search report, his phone rang. His investigator's voice came through. "We found her." Alexander's pulse roared. "Where?" Maya had disappeared into a quiet coastal town, far from the city, far from her past. She worked at a small bookstore by the ocean, spending her days lost in pages, trying to forget the man she loved. But the moment she heard his voice, "Maya," her entire body froze. She turned, and there he was, Alexander Carter, standing in the doorway of the bookstore, looking at her like he had just found his entire world. Maya's breath caught. "You," she whispered. "How did you—" But before she could finish, he closed the distance between them. His hands cupped her face. His ocean blue eyes burned into hers. And his voice, deep, raw, unshakable, sent shivers down her spine. "I told you, Maya," he said. "I'd never stop looking for you." Tears welled in her eyes. "Alexander?" But his lips crashed into hers, a kiss that was full of rage, love, pain, and longing. A kiss that told her everything. He had found her. He had fought for her. And he wasn't going to let her go. Not ever again. Maya sat on the wooden porch of the small bookstore she worked at, her feet buried in the cool sand as the ocean waves crashed in the distance. She had built a quiet life here, safe, peaceful, hidden. But not a day passed without his face haunting her thoughts. Alexander Carter, the man she had loved, the man she had run from, and the man she believed she would never see again. Her fingers tightened around the cup of tea in her hands as she sighed, staring out at the endless blue horizon. But then, a voice she knew too well, a voice that sent shivers down her spine, even after all this time. "Maya!" Her breath hitched. She turned, her heart pounding. And there he was, Alexander, standing just a few feet away, his piercing ocean blue eyes locked onto hers. He looked different, not just because of his slightly unshaven jawline or the way his hair was a little more tousled than usual, but because he looked like a man who had been through hell, a man who had searched relentlessly, a man who had finally found what he had been looking for. Her. Maya felt her throat tighten as emotions swirled inside her. "Uh, Alexander," she whispered. He took a step forward, then another, and then he was right in front of her. "I told you," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I told you I'd never stop looking for you." Tears welled in Maya's eyes. How did you find me?" A small, almost breathless chuckle escaped him. "You think I'd ever let you disappear?" She swallowed hard. "You should have." His jaw tensed. "Never." Their gazes locked, and in that moment, every memory, every moment of pain, every second of longing crashed between them like a violent storm. And Maya couldn't fight it anymore. Maya had spent months convincing herself that leaving Alexander was for the best, that it was the only way to protect him, that she would forget him. But seeing him again, feeling his warmth so close to her, she realized one thing. She had never stopped loving him, not for a single second, and she never would. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I missed you." Alexander exhaled sharply, his hands trembling as he reached for her face. I love you, Maya. Her breath hitched. His voice was raw, desperate, unshakable. You're the only woman I've ever wanted, he continued. The only one I will ever want. Maya's heart shattered and mended all at once. She had spent so long running from this, from him, from the truth. But now, she didn't want to run anymore. I love you too, she whispered. The second the words left her lips, Alexander pulled her into his arms. His lips crashed onto hers, a kiss filled with months of longing, pain, and unstoppable passion. Maya melted against him, her hands gripping his shirt as he kissed her, like she was the only thing that mattered in the world. Because to Alexander, she was. They never made it back inside the house. The moment Alexander lifted her into his arms, Maya let herself fall completely. Into his love, into his warmth, into him. The cool night breeze surrounded them as he carried her inside, their lips never breaking apart. His hands trembled as he brushed her hair away from her face, his eyes filled with so much love. Maya felt like she was drowning in it. You're mine, he murmured against her lips. Maya nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I always was. Their clothes fell to the floor as the night wrapped around them, and for the first time in months, Maya felt safe, loved, home. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting a golden glow over the room. Maya woke up in the warmth of Alexander's embrace, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. For the first time in forever, she felt at peace. She traced her fingers over his bare chest, a small smile playing on her lips. You're awake, Alexander murmured, his voice thick with sleep. Maya glanced up, meeting his gaze. So are you. His arms tightened around her. I don't want to close my eyes. Not when I finally have you back. Her heart swelled. She reached up, brushing a soft kiss against his lips. I'm not leaving this time. Alexander let out a shaky breath, relief flooding his entire being. Promise me, he whispered. She cupped his face. I promise. A slow, breathtaking smile spread across his lips. And as the sun rose, painting the sky with hues of pink and gold, Maya knew. She had found her forever. Maya stood before the large bedroom window, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the ocean waves in the distance. The warmth of Alexander's arms wrapped around her waist as he pulled her close, pressing a tender kiss to the back of her neck. You're staring again, she murmured with a soft smile. Alexander chuckled, resting his chin on her shoulder. Can you blame me? I almost lost you once. Now I can't stop looking at you. Maya turned in his arms, her brown eyes shimmering with emotion. You'll never lose me again. He cupped her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. Then marry me. She laughed softly. You already asked me that yesterday. And I'll ask you every single day for the rest of my life, he whispered. Maya's heart swelled as she wrapped her arms around his neck. Then I guess I'll say yes every single day. Alexander leaned down, capturing her lips in a slow, passionate kiss. Their love had been tested. They had fought against the odds, and now it was time for their forever to begin. Word spread quickly about the billionaire marrying a former cleaner. Some people called it a fairy tale. Others whispered that Maya was just lucky, but neither Maya nor Alexander cared. This wasn't about luck. This was about love. Alexander refused to have a massive, extravagant wedding filled with strangers who didn't care about their love story. This is our day, he told Maya, his fingers laced with hers. I only want the people who truly matter. Maya smiled. Then let's make it simple but beautiful. And so, the preparations began. Maya didn't want a designer dress worth millions. She didn't want a wedding that screamed money. She wanted a wedding that screamed love. Her dress was elegant yet simple, a white satin gown that hugged her figure beautifully. Her hair was styled in soft waves, cascading down her back. And in her hands she held a bouquet of white roses, Alexander's favorite. The venue was a breathtaking seaside estate, with golden fairy lights twinkling under the evening sky. Only close friends and family were invited. No paparazzi, no reporters, just them and their love. As Maya stood at the entrance, ready to walk down the aisle, her heart pounded. Not with nerves, but with love. She looked ahead and found Alexander waiting for her. His navy blue tuxedo fit him perfectly, But what took her breath away was the way he looked at her, like she was the only woman in the world. As she took slow steps forward, her mind flooded with memories. Their first meeting, the night he found her crying, the first time he kissed her, the moment she ran away, the moment he found her again. And now, she was walking toward him, forever. When she reached him, Alexander took her hands, his touch warm and firm. "You look breathtaking," he whispered. She smiled. "And you look like a man who's about to cry." He chuckled, his eyes glistening. "I just might." The officiant began speaking, but Maya barely heard the words. All she could hear was the thundering of her own heart. And when it was time for the vows, Alexander's deep voice sent shivers down her spine. "Maya," Alexander began, his voice thick with emotion, "I was a man who had everything, money, power, luxury, but none of it ever made me happy." His fingers tightened around hers. "Then you walked into my life, and suddenly I realized I had nothing, because I didn't have you." Maya's eyes brimmed with tears. "You changed me. You showed me that love isn't about status or wealth. It's about soul, and yours is the most beautiful soul I've ever known." A tear slipped down her cheek. "I promise to love you in the dark days and the bright ones, to stand beside you, no matter what, to never let you go again." Maya struggled to breathe as she wiped her tears and spoke her own vows. "Alexander, I never believed I was worthy of a love like this. A love so deep, so powerful, that it could change my world." She took a shaky breath. "But you never let me believe I was less than I am. You saw me, truly saw me, and you loved me, not because of what I had, but because of who I am." Her voice trembled, but she continued, "I vow to stand by you, not as a billionaire's wife, but as the woman who will love you endlessly, no matter what life brings." Alexander squeezed her hands, and when the officiant said, "You may now kiss the bride," Alexander didn't hesitate. He pulled her into his arms, claiming her lips in a kiss that spoke of forever. The reception was filled with laughter, love, and endless dancing. For the first time in forever, Maya felt free. She wasn't a homeless woman anymore. She wasn't just a cleaner. She wasn't beneath him. She was his, and he was hers. As they danced under the twinkling fairy lights, Alexander leaned in and whispered, "Are you happy, Mrs. Carter?" Maya smiled, her heart overflowing with joy. "Happier than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Then let's start our forever." And as they stood together, wrapped in love and light, Maya knew this was only the beginning.